Welcome back to the Product Safety Podcast, brought to you by AMS Consultants. Today we're diving deep into something super important if you're thinking about selling products in the EU. It's all about the EU technical file. But before we get started, just a quick reminder that what we talk about here is just general info, okay? It's not legal advice or anything like that. Right, so you might be thinking, what in the world is this EU technical file? Well, think of it like your product's passport to enter the EU market. It's like a big document that proves your product checks all the boxes for EU safety, health, and environmental rules. It shows you've done your homework and makes getting that CE marking a whole lot smoother. And to help us break down this essential document, we've got our compliance expert back with us.
Always great to be here.
Okay, so I know this can seem kind of overwhelming, but let's take it step by step. What are the key things that have to be in this EU technical file?
Well, first off, you've got to have a super clear description of your product. It's like introducing your product to someone who's never seen it before, right? We're talking technical specs, what it's used for, even who it's made for. You're basically painting a detailed picture so everyone, especially those market surveillance people, know exactly what your product is all about.
So let's say we're talking about a cool new electric scooter. What kind of details would we include in that description?
You'd specify things like how powerful it is, how fast it can go, how much weight it can handle, and even what ages it's meant for.
So we're not just saying, hey, it's a scooter, right? We're giving all the important details to make things crystal clear. Gotcha. So what's next?
After you've got that product description down, you move on to the design and manufacturing stuff. Think blueprints, schematics, the whole 9 yards. It's like a roadmap of how your product is made.
This is where it gets interesting, right? Like if our electric scooter has this awesome new battery tech, this is where we show off all the safety features built into the design.
Exactly. This section proves you've thought about safety right from the start, minimizing risks from the get-go. And speaking of safety, the next part is crucial, the risk assessment.
Okay, risk assessment. That's pretty serious. Is this where we try to guess all the crazy things someone could do with their scooter, even if they're not supposed to?
Exactly. You got to figure out all the potential hazards, even those that could come from misuse. Accidents happen, and it's your job to be ready for them. You'll figure out how likely each hazard is and how bad the injury could be. Then you'll outline what you've done to reduce those risks.
So let's say someone thinks it's a good idea to ride our electric scooter down a flight of stairs. Not exactly recommended, but we still have to think about that risk.
Right. You'd figure out how likely that is to happen and how bad the injury could be. And then you'd explain how your design makes it safer. Maybe it's reinforced handlebars, super durable tires, or even warnings in the user manual. This shows you've really thought about all sorts of scenarios.
It's all about proving we haven't just thought about it, but we've actually done something to address it. I like it. What else goes into this technical file?
Well, next you need to show some proof. This is where those test reports from accredited labs come in.
Test reports. This is where our electric scooter gets put through its paces, right?
Exactly. These reports prove that your scooter meets all the safety and performance standards for its category. Think electrical safety tests, electromagnetic compatibility checks, and anything else specific to its features and how it's supposed to be used.
So we're talking proof that our scooter won't suddenly burst into flames or mess with air traffic control, right?
You got it. These tests make sure your scooter is safe and works the way it should without causing any unexpected problems. And they provide solid evidence for your technical file.
Okay, so these test reports are like our scooter's report card showing it aced all the tests. What else do we need to wrap up this massive document?
The next part is all about responsibility. The EU Declaration of Conformity.
The EU Declaration of Conformity. This is where someone important at the company signs their name, right? Putting their name and reputation on the line.
Exactly. It's a legally binding statement declaring that your product follows all the relevant EU rules and that you, as the manufacturer, take full responsibility for its compliance. It's not just saying, hey, we think our scooter's compliant. It's a formal commitment that carries legal weight.
So this technical file is really shaping up to be a pretty thorough document. Is there anything else we need to throw in there?
In some cases, you might also include documents about your quality management system, your QMS.
Okay, so now we're getting into acronyms. Can you explain what a QMS is and why it matters for our electric scooter?
Think of a QMS as the system you have in place to keep your products and processes top-notch. If you have a certified QMS like ISO 9001, you'd include documents showing how effective it is.
So it's like showing that our scooter is the result of a well-defined, quality-controlled system, not just some random assembly process. This proves our dedication to quality, making our compliance even stronger.
Exactly. It gives both consumers and regulators that extra peace of mind.
This is all starting to make sense, but before we move on, there's something I'm curious about.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about what goes into the technical file, but what about keeping it up to date? Products change over time, right? Our electric scooter might get some upgrades down the line.
That's a great point, and it's really important. A technical file isn't something you make once and forget about. It needs to change as your product changes.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Yeah.
We can't just create this huge file, stick it in a drawer, and call it a day.
Definitely not. Any changes to your scooter, like design tweaks, new materials, or updates to how it's made, all need to be documented in your technical file.
So if we add some cool LED lights to our electric scooter, we got to document that.
Absolutely. You need to detail the kind of LEDs, how they're powered, any safety tests, and include all of that in the file.
So it's like constantly adding to our product story, keeping it up to date. Sounds like good documentation and organization are key here.
You're absolutely right. A well-maintained technical file is your best friend when it comes to showing you're compliant. It gives you peace of mind knowing you have all the proof you need.
Speaking of proof, there's another term I keep hearing when it comes to EU regulations. Harmonized standards. What are those all about?
Harmonized standards are like pre-approved blueprints for compliance. They're developed by European standards organizations, and they cover specific aspects of product safety and performance.
So instead of starting from scratch, we can use these standards to guide our design and testing. That saves us time and makes sure we're meeting the requirements, right?
Exactly. And here's the best part. If you follow a harmonized standard and can prove you're compliant, you get what's called the presumption of conformity.
Presumption of conformity. Sounds pretty legal. Does that mean we're automatically in the clear?
Not completely off the hook, but it definitely helps. It basically means you've shown you meet the requirements of the relevant EU directive as long as that standard covers all the risks for your specific product. Think of it like a fast pass through customs. You've already shown you meet the basics.
Okay, that makes sense. It makes things easier and gives us a clear path to getting that CE marking. So if our electric scooter meets all the relevant harmonized standards, we're good to go. We can just relax.
Well, not so fast. Harmonized standards are great, but they're not always a perfect fit.
What do you mean? Can't we just follow a standard and be done with it?
Not always. Sometimes a standard might not cover every single risk associated with your product. Let's say our electric scooter has a unique folding mechanism, something new that's not in any existing standard.
Ah, I see. We can't just ignore potential dangers just because a standard doesn't specifically mention them.
Exactly. You're still responsible for making sure your scooter is safe, even if it means going above and beyond what a harmonized standard says.
So in those cases, we'd need to provide extra documentation and testing to prove we've thought about those unique risks, going the extra mile for safety.
Exactly. You might have to run more tests, provide detailed explanations in your technical file, or even work with a notified body to get their expert opinion.
Okay, notified body, another important term. Can you remind me what that is?
A notified body is an independent organization approved by an EU country to assess whether certain products meet the requirements, especially for products that have higher risks.
So let's say we're making a self-driving electric scooter. That sounds pretty high risk, so we might need to get approval from a notified body before we can even think about selling it in the EU.
That's a good example. They would go through your technical file, do audits, and run more tests to make sure your product meets all the requirements. It gives you and consumers that extra level of confidence.
Okay, it's all starting to click now. Harmonized standards are super useful, but they're not one-size-fits-all. We still need to be careful, think critically about our product safety, and be ready to go the extra mile.
Wow.
Compliance isn't just about following rules. It's about understanding the principles of safety and showing that we've done everything we can to protect consumers.
Well said.
Wow, we've covered a lot already. And we're just getting started with this deep dive into the EU technical file. There's still so much more to talk about.
You're right, we've only just scratched the surface. Next, we'll dive into the roles and responsibilities of all the different players in the supply chain. Because remember, it's not just the manufacturer who's involved in making sure a product is compliant.
I can't wait to unpack that. Stay tuned, folks, as we continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of EU technical files right here on the Product Safety Podcast.
So now that we've looked at what goes into an EU technical file, let's take a step back and see how it fits in the whole supply chain. You know, it's not just a standalone thing. And understanding how all the different players use this document is super important for making things run smoothly in the EU market.
Yeah, that's a good point. Supply chains these days are so complex. Who knew bringing an electric scooter to market would involve so many different people?
Right. You've got manufacturers, importers, distributors, and sometimes even authorized representatives. Everyone has their own part to play in making sure things are compliant and keeping those products safe for consumers.
Okay, let's unpack these roles, starting with the manufacturer. They're the ones actually building the product, so it makes sense that they're the main ones responsible for the technical file.
You got it. The manufacturer is like the captain of the compliance ship. They're the ones ultimately responsible for meeting all those EU requirements. They're in charge of putting together the technical file, doing all the conformity assessments, and making that super important declaration of conformity.
So they're setting the standard for compliance right from the start. But what about all the other people in the supply chain? Do they just sit back and watch while the manufacturer does all the work?
Oh, no, not at all. Everyone has a role to play, and if one person messes up, it can affect everyone else. Importers, for example, have a really important responsibility, especially when we're talking about products made outside the EU.
Okay, so let's say we're importing those cool electric scooters from a factory overseas. What are our obligations as the importer? Can we just trust that the manufacturer is taking care of everything?
Well, trust is important in business, of course, but when it comes to EU compliance, you got to verify everything. As an importer, you're basically putting your name on the line for the manufacturer's compliance. You have to make sure they've done their due diligence, that the technical file is complete and correct, and that the product actually meets all the EU rules.
So due diligence means we can't just assume everything is fine because a scooter looks good and has a CE marking on it. We actually have to do some digging.
Exactly. Think of yourself as a detective working on a case. You're not just taking the manufacturer's word for it, you're looking for evidence that the product is compliant. You might ask for and carefully look over the technical file, check the test reports, and maybe even do some of your own spot checks.
So we're not just importing scooters, we're importing responsibility too. Sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but it's super important for keeping the EU market safe and making sure only products that meet the rules get to consumers. Importers are a big part of making that happen.
Okay, I see how this shared responsibility thing works. But what about distributors? Where do they fit into this compliance puzzle? They might not be making the technical file, but they're the ones getting the product to the stores and to the people who buy them.
That's right. Distributors might not be the ones creating the technical file, but they still have a responsibility to act with due care.
Due care. What does that mean for someone who's distributing these electric scooters?
It means they need to do what's reasonable to make sure they're not handling or selling products that don't meet the rules. They should be able to trace where the product came from, check that it has the CE marking, and feel confident that the importer did their due diligence.
So if a distributor gets a bunch of scooters and some of them are missing the CE marking or something seems off, they shouldn't just ignore it and sell them anyway.
No way. They need to look into it. Remember, everyone in the supply chain is responsible for keeping consumers safe, and distributors are an important part of that.
I'm getting a better understanding of how this system works. It's like a chain of responsibility where each link depends on the strength of the others. Are there any other people involved in this whole compliance thing?
Yeah, sometimes you might come across authorized representatives. These are people or companies based in the EU who are chosen by manufacturers outside the EU. They handle specific tasks related to compliance and act as a point of contact within the EU.
So if our electric scooter factory was in Vietnam, for instance, we might choose an authorized representative here in the EU to be our person on the ground.
Exactly. They would keep a copy of the technical file, be the main contact for the EU authorities, and handle any questions from market surveillance.
So they're like our compliance ambassadors, making sure we're doing everything right. This is starting to make a lot more sense. But let's switch gears for a minute and talk about what happens if someone doesn't follow the rules. What are the consequences of non-compliance?
That's when things can get pretty serious. You could be looking at big fines, product recalls, or even legal action in some cases.
Let's imagine the worst-case scenario. Say our electric scooters start catching on fire all over Europe.
Oof, that'd be a compliance nightmare.
Sounds like it. We'd be in big trouble, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. If your products are causing harm, those market surveillance authorities will be knocking on your door pretty quickly.
So we're talking product recalls, massive fines, and maybe even lawsuits.
You got it. They can force you to recall products, slap you with fines that could be millions of euros, and even ban your products from the EU market completely.
Okay, that's definitely a wake-up call. Compliance isn't just about paperwork. It's about protecting our business and our reputation, too.
Absolutely. Not following the rules can be really expensive, both for your wallet and for how people see your brand. It's always better to invest in compliance from the start than to deal with the fallout from a product safety issue later on.
I totally agree. It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But how can we be sure our technical file is rock solid and that we're doing everything we can to avoid those consequences?
It all comes down to planning, carefully paying attention to detail, and really committing to safety. Your technical file is your proof that you're compliant, and it needs to be thorough, accurate, and up to date.
So it's not just about making a huge document. It's about making a high-quality document. No cutting corners or trying to hide anything.
Right. You need to make sure you're meeting all the important requirements, documenting your processes carefully, and keeping your file organized and easy to find. And remember, compliance isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuous process. You have to stay updated on any changes in regulations, update your technical file accordingly, and be ready for audits or inspections.
So it's a marathon, not a sprint. We need to pace ourselves, stay focused, and keep our compliance game strong.
Exactly. Compliance is a journey, not a destination. And a well-kept technical file is like your roadmap guiding you toward a safe and successful product launch in the EU. And speaking of a successful launch, let's move on to some practical tips for actually creating a strong technical file. I know it can seem daunting, but I promise we'll make it easier to understand.
Welcome back to the Product Safety Podcast, brought to you by AMS Consultants. We're wrapping up our deep dive into EU technical files, and I'm really interested to hear those practical tips you mentioned. Creating one of these files sounds like a big job, so any advice would be great.
I hear you. There aren't really any shortcuts when it comes to compliance, but there are definitely some things you can do to make the process a lot smoother. And it all starts with something simple: starting early.
Starting early. So we shouldn't wait till the last minute to try and put together a technical file.
Definitely not. Instead of thinking of compliance as something you do at the end, make it part of how you develop your product from the very beginning. Like as soon as you start thinking about ideas for your next electric scooter, start thinking about compliance and how you'll document every step.
So compliance becomes like part of the product's DNA, not something we just add on later. That makes a lot of sense. It takes the pressure off and helps us avoid those late nights scrambling to meet deadlines. What else can we do to make this whole thing easier?
Staying organized is key. Don't just treat your technical file like a pile of random papers. Create a system, use clear names for everything, and make it easy to find what you need. Think of it like you're building a really organized library where each document has its own spot on the shelf with a clear label.
I like that analogy. A well-organized technical file makes it easier for everyone to find what they need, whether it's someone on your team or an auditor who's coming to check things out. Nobody wants to be searching through a mountain of files when they need something quickly, so organization is key. Got it. What else should we remember?
Being clear is super important. Remember, anyone who looks at your technical file needs to be able to understand it. That might include people who don't know much about your product or all the technical terms. Think of it this way. You should be able to explain even the most complicated features of your electric scooter so that your grandma could understand it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't matter how advanced our technology is, the technical file has to be clear and straightforward. We need to explain things clearly and make sure everything is easy to understand. Okay, so clarity, check. What about those harmonized standards we talked about earlier? How do we use those in our technical file?
Harmonized standards are really helpful resources, but remember, they're not the be-all and end-all. Take your time to really understand them, what they cover and what they don't cover, and then document how you've applied them to your specific product. Don't just stick a standard number in your file and think you're done.
So we have to show our work, so to speak. We need to prove that we've actually used the requirements of the standard to make sure our scooter is compliant.
Right. You might want to use tables, cross-references, or whatever works best to make that connection crystal clear. Being transparent and documenting everything is crucial. The more thorough and transparent your technical file is, the better off you'll be.
I'm definitely seeing a theme here. Transparency, organization, and clear documentation are the keys to a good EU technical file. Any final words of advice before we wrap up today?
One last tip. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Talk to your suppliers. Get advice from experts and think about working with a notified body, especially for more complex products or ones that are considered high risk. Compliance is a team effort. Use the knowledge and experience of others to make sure you're on the right track.
So we don't have to do it all alone. Getting help from experts can save us time, money, and a lot of headaches in the long run. This has been incredibly helpful. I feel a lot more confident about navigating the world of EU technical files now. Thanks for explaining everything so clearly and for all the great advice.
My pleasure. It's all about giving businesses the tools they need to tackle compliance with confidence.
Well said. It feels like we've covered just about everything there is to know about EU technical files. Before we go, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Remember, compliance isn't just a box you check off. It's a fundamental part of making a product, getting it to market, and most importantly, keeping consumers safe. Put in the time and effort, stay organized, and don't be afraid to reach out to an expert if you need help.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us today on the Product Safety Podcast, brought to you by AMS Consultants. And remember, folks, this deep dive was just for informational purposes, not legal advice or anything like that. If you're ever unsure about something, reach out to a qualified professional.
Absolutely.
And to wrap things up, I'll leave you with this thought. We've spent this episode talking about how to get your products compliant and into the EU market today. But what about the future? How do you think the world of compliance will change as technology gets more advanced, supply chains become even more complex, and new challenges pop up? Something to think about as you continue your compliance journey. Until next time, stay safe and compliant.